The views expressed in this interview are those of the individuals and do not reflect the official policy or position of the U.S. government, the Department of Defense, the U.S. Navy, or the Naval Postgraduate School. Welcome to the Trident Room, brewer of stout conversation, unfiltered and on tap. On today's episode, the Trident Room host, James Reilly, sits down with Lieutenant Ryan Newmeyer.
Backstory, me and Ryan were at the Coast Guard Academy together. We'll talk about commissioning sources some other point. That was, we basically, I graduated. I didn't hear from you at all until DLI.
You make it sound like I just cut you out of my life.
No.
Good Lord.
That happened to a lot of people.
Yeah.
So.
Well, you're an even year, so nobody cares about you.
There you go. Yeah. That's the odd years, yeah.
Odd years are the best years. I don't know what you're talking about.
I think the even years had more fun. But
that's probably true.
You graduate, where do you go?
I was in the dead center of my class, so I had no illusions of getting San Diego, but like everybody says, don't put something on your dream sheet that you aren't expecting or will be happy with. So I was quite pleasantly surprised to open my envelope and find out that I was going to San Diego on the now decommissioned Cutter Hamilton, rest in peace, and spent 2 years there and the vast majority of my time. But we would come out and we would turn left and head south and do counter-narcotics patrols for the longest time. I distinctly remember, what was it? It was like probably our third patrol. We were pulling into El Salvador to unload our Hitron, so the counter-narcotics helicopter and all of the support gear to go shoot out the engines of GoFaz. And we were pulling into Alcohula, and that morning, because we were still in Pacific time, was the earthquake in Haiti. And Hamilton was the only operational 378 in the entire fleet. So out of the 13, there was only one that could get underway, and we were the one. And so there was a huge discussion of, are we going to go through the Panama Canal? And nobody knew anything. It was all being worked out in Washington. And sure enough, we were, in the span of 8 hours, we were told, all right, make best speed, which for a 378 is not great. Because while we may have 2 gas turbines and on paper a 378 can go 30 knots, that 30 knots, like the whole ship is shaking. You think it's going to break at the seams, and invariably one of your gas turbine engines is just going to blow up.
Oh, yeah. And so were you deck side or engineering side?
Deck side.
Okay. Yeah.
Engineering and I don't get along.
No.
But so we go through the Panama Canal, and we were the first cutter to go through the canal in years. Because you were a land ship or you're a pack ship, and neither of the two shall cross. Now we send cutters through the Panama Canal like it's, a regular occurrence, but that was a huge deal for a 378 or any Coast Guard cutter to go through the canal. And then we did Haiti ops for 45 days, and that was like awesome. And then went back to doing counter-narcotics missions for another year or so, and then Hamilton gets decommissioned in March of 2011 after our final patrol up in the Bering Sea, which was an experience in and of itself. And then after that, I, because my dad was in the Navy, he was a surface warfare officer, so I kind of wanted to see what I missed out on not going to the Naval Academy. And so I did my first exchange tour because it's a little-known program, and I don't know how many people are in it now. But
no, yeah. So tell me about this. What is the exchange tour program?
So at any given time, when I was going through it, there were 5. I don't know what the numbers are now, but there are X number of Coast Guard officers in their second tour who are serving as navigators on board surface ships in the Navy, whether it's a cruiser or a destroyer, or I don't think they're on LCS, but they could be. I don't know.
Okay.
LCS was still kind of a new program. They were still like pumping them out, and we weren't on them yet. But you serve as the navigator. and it's an awesome experience. It's very different. You see a very different side of surface ship communities. The Navy is very different than the Coast Guard and how we run our bridges with the number of people on there, just the whole qualification process. So in 2011 to 13, I served on the USS Mason out of Norfolk.
Cool.
Met her on deployment, so I got to do the Suez Canal. So I've done both of the major canals in the world, which is a pretty cool accomplishment. I have the certificates on my wall. But it was a very eye-opening experience. A lot of people at the time says that anytime you do an exchange tour with the DoD, especially when you're a junior officer, it's your Coast Guard appreciation tour, because you kind of come back and you're like, wow. The amount of responsibility that is pushed down on the junior-most people in the Coast Guard is pretty impressive, and relatively unheard of within the Joint Force. But so I did 2 years there, got my SWO pin, something that we actually can't do anymore because the Navy surface warfare community changed their rules in 2018 in response to 2018 in response to the incidences with the USS Fitzgerald and USS John S. McCain.
Was there anything you took from the Navy further on in your career?
I mean, there was, because eventually I went back. I did a second exchange tour. After I left the destroyer, I had a pretty cool opportunity when I didn't get selected for command, where I screened for command coming off the destroyer, but I didn't get selected, which is, devastating at first, but then actually I think worked out well for the long run, because after I left the destroyer, I went to go be the flag aide for the District 11 commander, which at the time was Admiral Schultz when he was a 1-star. Now, the Commandant of the Coast Guard. But that was a great opportunity to spend a year with him, and then a year with Admiral Servideo, who relieved him halfway through my tour, because it gave me the opportunity to broaden my understanding of the Coast Guard operating at the 37,000-foot strategic level. So D11 is a pretty unique district in that it has the California-Oregon border all the way down to Ecuador, and then inland to the Rockies. And so it has a pretty diverse mission set, including, the ports of Los Angeles, Long Beach, San Diego, Stockton, Oakton. So there's a lot of prevention stuff that I got exposure to. And so as a service officer who had done 4 years of float, going to the flag staff to understand different parts of how the service operates, specifically the prevention side in the ports of Los Angeles, Long Beach, which is a fascinating experience, was really cool for me because I got a deeper understanding of the other missions. Like I said, Cuttermen can do a lot of things. We're great at doing a lot of things, specifically, law enforcement cutters. But it was cool seeing the prevention guys going on board container ships and seeing how they do their thing, and the cruise ship inspection stuff, because that's a part that we specifically as Cuttermen don't understand, is that, and I think the public in general, any cruise ship that comes into the United States is inspected, usually overseas when they're building it. I have friends that are doing cruise ship inspections in France and Sweden and all those other places.
And those are them. And those are Coast Guard positions.
Yeah, 100% Coast Guard officers that fly all over to go see the cruise ships as they're being inspected, or as they're being built, to make sure that they're doing the required training, they have all the safety equipment, because any ship that comes into the port is subject to our we don't have exclusive jurisdiction, but we have a lot of jurisdiction over those vessels for the peace and security of the port and stuff like that. So it was very cool to see that, and see kind of how at the port level, at the local level, the sector level, they have to integrate with the commercial side of the house.
And so, and at this point, you're an admiral's aide, working for the admiral that is in charge of basically the territory that covers most of California, and so
Coast Guard operations all over. So,
and LA is a huge part of that.
LA is a huge part of that, especially the port, the actual commercial port, because still 40% of U.S. commerce goes in and out of the ports, the unified ports of Los Angeles, Long Beach, which I didn't know at the time are two different port complexes, because the city of Los Angeles owns the port of L.A. Long Beach is a little bit different, but it's fascinating. They essentially, like, if you look at Google Earth, they're the same place, but they are completely different beasts. Which was just fascinating to see, and eye-opening to see how all of that stuff happens. And, you know, when I was down there, I think it was one of the Chinese shipping companies had just started, because this was 2013 to 2015, was just starting to build up the automated port complex where everything was being done by automation. That's since kind of like expanded elsewhere in the port, but it was very interesting to like see those operations get started, and just containers just moving, and how like it was just in time delivery. And I think if you look at the news now, you can see that there's a very long line of ships sitting outside of the ports of Los Angeles Long Beach waiting to come in.
Yes, yeah, the just in time stuff is definitely like, and I think not due to us, thankfully.
Oh yeah, definitely not due to the Coast Guard. This is
No.
not a Coast Guard problem.
No, yeah, I think it's getting it off the ships and onto trucks is now the big thing. But
And
so
retrofitting containers, but
so and then as an aide, you're, I mean, basically just more or less following the admiral.
yeah, you keep them on schedule.
Okay.
And to steal a line from like Hamilton, a lot of times you're like in the room where it happens, so you see how the policy is formulated, kind of the thought process that goes into the policy, and kind of the process by which decisions are made, whether you agree with them or you don't. And I agreed with a lot of them, and I didn't agree with a lot of the decisions that were made at the time, as did the admiral. But it was a fascinating process to see how the service kind of made and arrived at these decisions, and kind of the competing priorities and whose pet projects were what, and kind of the personality dynamics that were also involved. And it was a great opportunity. And I always encourage junior officers or anybody who has the opportunity to be a flag aide to take that opportunity. It's a pretty thankless job at times, but Admiral Ryan, who was, when she was in 2004, she was the flag aide, the military aide to the president during the President Clinton reelect. And so she was flying all over the world, like blistering the paint off of Air Force One, because apparently the president was always running behind schedule. But I asked her, I was like, "Ma'am, what was that like?" And she kind of summed it up the right way. So she said, "You know, Ryan, it's like having tickets to the Super Bowl and sitting on the 50-yard line. The view is amazing, but it comes at a price. And there, like anything, especially in my career, I've had these awesome opportunities, but everything comes with a price. And you pay the price and you see what it's like. And I, so far, have not been disappointed in the cost. But it's a pretty cool view. But, you know, there's trade-offs. Like, your schedule is no longer your own. You cede 2 years of your life to somebody else.
Yeah, and it's not. Yeah, that's 2 years with what? How much time at home?
It depends. Like,
Yeah.
I was lucky because I had two admirals that valued home life, but I know a bunch of flag aides that just didn't have that opportunity.
Yeah, and are just never home, basically. Yeah. Yeah. So.
Out of that, I went to Puerto Rico.
Oh, okay, cool.
And that was an awesome opportunity because that was at the still very early stages of bringing the fast response cutters online, which, you know, when I left the destroyer, I wanted command. I wanted my own patrol boat. I wanted to be the last great kingdom in the world.
And you're what? You're
Junior lieutenant.
Yeah,
I
junior lieutenant.
just pinned on lieutenant.
So you're CO of an FRC.
Yes.
A newly commissioned FRC
Yes.
in Puerto Rico. That's incredible as far as an experience goes.
Yeah, I tell this a lot of people, like, you're giving a 29-year-old the keys to a Maserati, and especially in Puerto Rico, you're kind of asking him to be like Captain Jack Sparrow. Like, you get to, because of the Coast Guard law enforcement mission set, you go out and you're boarding boats that are, smuggling people or drugs, and, detaining the smugglers and kind of rescuing the migrants from dangerous situations. And you're 29 and you have sole authority, and you, like I said, it's one of the last great kingdoms in the world to be command of your own ship.
And tell me, so I've always been interested in this, and I know Puerto Rico is its own animal. So because you're so far removed from any other, the U.S. mainland, to be frank,
Mm-hmm.
but also any of sort of the major Coast Guard infrastructure.
Right.
So you're the person you're reporting to.
So we report to the sector, and underneath the sector construct, you have the sector commander, the deputy sector commander, and then you have kind of those three or four different departments. Response being one of them, prevention being another, logistics, and then
And these are basically equivalent to kind of like surface line type jobs in the Navy, where except a little more command responsibility, and a little more operational responsibility.
Yeah. So it's not a clean line. It's really not.
No.
But the sector response officer is either an 04 or an 05. And you kind of want to think of them as the squadron / strike group N3, N5.
Okay.
Is kind of, it's a really bad analogy, but it's like the closest I can get, because they're in charge of like operations. So I don't keep using the word response. They're in charge with a lot of like the response operation, the day-to-day operations of the assets that go out and do like hands-on missions, like coastal boarding, law enforcement boardings, search and rescue operations, stuff like that, all run underneath the response department. Prevention does a lot of the left dipping. Like, they're responsible for the port security of like the container terminals and doing the port state control inspections and stuff like that. But I reported to the sector response officer.
So an 04 is basically
04 is an enforcement. 05 was the response officer, and they
Okay.
reported to the 06 deputy and sector commanders.
Got it.
Both of them are 06s in San Juan.
Well, yeah, and so what type of direction do you get from them as far as what to do and where to go and things like that?
They kind of handle the cases. So when I was there, it's changed a little bit, I think, from my understanding, where GIADF South has a little bit more say in the kind of the operations of some of the FRCs, because the services has adapted the way we use them, because the FRCs are such a capable platform. They're able to actually go deeper down into the Caribbean. But when I was there, the sector response officer worked directly with GIADF in District 7 to kind of do the counter narcotics mission set. And the sector response would then direct us if we needed to do migrant and addiction operations. But, we would go and do, we would run down drug smuggling vessels from all over. And the law enforcement remit for San Juan basically went as far west as the Haiti-Dominican Republic border, and then as far east as the Lesser Antilles. So all of those islands down there were all under the law enforcement and search and rescue remit of Sector San Juan. And so I remember, and it was one of the coolest opportunities that I had. We were on patrol, guarding the Mona Island, which is a super small speck of land dead smack in the middle of the Mona Passage, which separates the eastern tip of the Dominican Republic with the western tip of mainland Puerto Rico. And this was still under, I think this was still under the wet foot, dry foot policy. So
all right.
there was
Explain the wet foot, dry foot policy.
The wet foot, dry foot policy. A very complicated policy that is resulting from the Cuban Adjustment Act of 95, I believe, when it was either 95 or 96.
A very important sort of strategic type policy for the Coast Guard interaction with migrants.
Especially Cuban migrants.
So, yes, please, go ahead.
And so it stems from the fact that our relationship with Cuba is fraught with, like, intricacies and trapdoors and not just recent history, but a very long history of mistrust and slights on both sides. And so when the current regime of Cuba initially started under Fidel Castro, there was some flow of goods and people and have you. That stopped. And then, you know, people were still able to travel a little bit. But in the late 80s, you had the Mariel boat lift, where basically there were protests, Cuban protests against the government not allowing people to leave. So Fidel said, fine, if you want to go, then go, and kind of facilitated a mass migration.
To Miami,
to
basically.
Miami. Yeah, to Miami. Basically, there were boats that came from... The porter was open for like a period of time. So all of the boats came down from Miami to load up all of their relatives and bring them back, and that was fine. And then kind of the borders kind of got a little bit sealed.
And that's basically the opening to Scarface, if you guys want some sort of visual reference of what happened. But continue.
And so when the 90s start rolling around, Cuba changes their stance towards repatriation. And basically, because they didn't want any mixing of people, of ideologies. So if you made it feet dry, so if you touched dry land in the United States, you were immediately dirty, to use this parlance. And so they wouldn't accept you back. And so you may have illegally immigrated to the United States, because there are legal pathways to immigrate into the United States through the U.S. Embassy, and there always has been. People who illegally entered the United States via the maritime means or the land border with Texas, we couldn't repatriate them back to Cuba because Cuba wouldn't accept them. And so the Cuban Adjustment Act was passed and essentially created a carve-out that, because we can't just declare people stateless and deport them to nowhere, and their home country wouldn't accept them, after a year in the United States, you were fast-tracked towards legal permanent resident status with a pathway towards ultimate citizenship and naturalization. So that was the policy from 1996 until 2017. And that was also kind of the nadir of the relationships between our two countries.
And so to reiterate, as a Cuban trying to get out of Cuba, what you had to do was set foot on dry land.
Yes.
And that was any type of dry land.
Yes.
So if you rolled up on Miami Beach and were able to get your ankles out of the water and onto that beach, you were considered a refugee and accepted into the U.S. refugee system. And happened to be any other territory that which not many people know that Mona Island, the island that you speak of, is the closest territory to the Dominican Republic.
Yes. And so there's Supreme Court rulings on kind of the Cuban Adjustment Act and the wet foot, dry foot policy. I think it's like the 7 Mile Bridge or something like that, where they didn't even need to get onto like contiguous land. They got on the pylon of like a decrepit bridge, and that was considered good enough for the U.S. government. But Somona Island is 20 miles? I think it's 20 miles. Because I think the whole span is like 32 between DR and the Dominican Republic and Puerto Rico. But
that sounds right. It's halfway.
Yeah, it's halfway. And so like you would run from Cuba to the Dominican Republic, and then they would get on boats and go to Mona or Desecheo or kind of Monito. Another small little island that is not great.
No, these are very small islands with
really dangerous to get on,
and no running water.
Oh God,
no. No shade. That's all it is scrub basically.
Mona is a nature preserve, and there are like 5 maybe Puerto Rican Parks Department people that live on there to maintain for international law purposes a like permanent foothold on the island. And so it's a nature reserve, so there's nothing there. People can go there like for ecotourism, but like you can't stay there. And so like we would be going down there. So I get this call because we were refueling in Mayaguez, which is on the far western part of the island, and it's the O5 saying, you know, how crazy are you? And I said, well, it depends on what the mission is. And it was, can you get to Barbados in 24 hours? And I said, well, I don't know. Let me do the math. Like I'm getting a sandwich at like the sandwich shop in Mayaguez. Like
this is in Puerto Rico on the West Coast.
Yeah, like, refueling, taking a quick break from getting my teeth bashed in because the seas aren't great in the Mona Passage. So get back, do the math, and I can get there in 24 hours. And he basically gives me kind of, to steal another movie reference, The Godfather, an offer I can't refuse. So he gives me this mission to go hunt for kind of a high important drug case that went after, and I had 24 hours to get to Barbados, or not Barbados, Barbados. Pull into Bridgetown, and met. I'm like, all right, refueling there, quick stop to like refuel, and then get down to Trinidad and Tobago, and do this kind of combined operation to go after this drug boat with the Trinidad and Tobago Coast Guard, which is their version of the Navy. And it was a just awesome opportunity. We eventually, operating off the northeast coast of South America, run down this drug boat and interdict 4.2 tons of cocaine.
Wow.
Which was, it still is, as far as I know, the largest patrol boat interdiction of cocaine in the Atlantic. It could have been eclipsed because we now have cutters operating in the fast response cutters operating in the Eastern Pacific, which just illustrates the legs of these ships that are just game changers for the Coast Guard in terms of counter narcotics and just missions in general. But it was such a cool operation to be like 29 and the Coast Guard, just the IT package wasn't great. So like you're operating very much off the grid, off the far side of the world with your mission to go out and do the business of the United States government, and it was awesome. Like you have a small close-knit crew of 20, 24, 25, and you're incredibly self-reliant on them, and you're then at the same time doing international relations by doing this combined operation with another nation who they were recapitalizing their ships at the same time, so they had a vested interest in getting this mission accomplished as well, so they can go back to their government and say, like, listen, this is the opportunity that we had and this is what we capitalized on. So like there was a lot of external pressure and some internal pressure put on myself to like get it done and get it done successfully, because there was a lot of eyes on you when you do that. And it was awesome. Like it was such a cool cool feeling to then, I mean, not necessarily the tow, because we interdicted essentially a shrimp fishing boat a la Forrest Gump. So towing that a long distance was not great, especially when I was like running low on fuel. That was not a pleasant experience. Didn't get a lot of sleep then, but it was such a great experience to like be at the very pointy end of some of these things that we talk about in Washington about international affairs and politics and working with other people, and kind of the Coast Guard's ability to just to seamlessly integrate with our partners in the Caribbean and, you know, show value to them and just reaffirm some relationships that don't necessarily get worked by our larger DoD, you know, siblings. And it was a lot of fun to carry 4.2 tons of cocaine into Puerto Rico with like the battle flag flying and just all of the press, and like, you know, you get that little snippet in like the New York Times.
That's very cool.
And yeah, like I was in the New York Times for like the good reasons rather than the bad reasons, which is the side you want to be on when you're the CEO of a ship.
Yes, definitely. That's, yeah. And I agree. I think one aspect of what we can do as far as improving international relations, and I know working with JIADF, we so this isn't, you know, the Coast Guard just happens to be the sort of operator in this, but we're going off of intel that has been collected by multiple different joint forces that are working in that area as well. And the fact that we can do that and work with another country, and, you know, two countries both agree drugs bad.
Yep.
Let's band together against this, and that's a huge benefit to relations, to international relations. So which we can, you know, we can really leverage that, especially in areas where, you know, potentially the relations we have with the country aren't the greatest. If we can say we can help you out with, you know, your drug problem, that can be a huge entryway into, you know, opening up better relations with the country, which is, I think, a strategic benefit.
No, it is, and JIADF South does a lot of good things. They definitely help, you know, steer us towards where we should be positioned and kind of help us position cutters, and may not always give us exact details on certain cases and stuff like that. But they are good because they do compile information and then kind of help disseminate it out. And, you know, luckily there are a lot of different liaison officers in and around JIADF that we are able to pass information along to help other entities do those interdictions. And that is, JIADF is just an interesting case study of an interagency operation that does work not without problems, but pretty seamless at this point. I mean, it's been around and evolved over, at this point, probably 30 some odd years, if I had to make a guess.
Yeah, I would say so. That's probably one of the first, you know, real, truly joint.
Joint interagency systems, I would have to say. You know, they definitely help the Coast Guard position ships where they're most likely to be able to affect some sort of interdiction, and don't necessarily give us exact queuing, but they're definitely good at providing information, for sure.
Thanks for joining us in the Trident Room. For more information about today's guest and topics, please visit the show notes. The Trident Room Podcast has been brought to you by the Naval Postgraduate School Alumni Association and Foundation. For questions, comments, and suggestions, please email us at tridentroompodcasthost@nps.edu and find us online at nps.edu/Trident Room Podcast.